The jurors' options, they can form their own trial story. And I've got plaintiff and defendant in here. I didn't change the slideshow. I usually give this speech to plaintiff's lawyers. But so they can adopt your trial story, or they can adopt the prosecution's trial story. Now, it's been my experience that you have a much better chance of a jury adopting your trial story if you have one. It took me a long time to figure that out, but I can say it. It's axiomatic now. So you want to have a very clear trial story. You want to know exactly what your trial story is. So you want to get them to discover it as their, but you not only want them to adopt your trial story, but you want to adopt it as their own. And you want to adopt it using the Zeigarnik effect. The Zeigarnik effect says that people will embrace that which they discover for themselves and hold on to it longer than that which they're spoon-fed. So it's better, I don't stand up if I'm trying to, I used to try a lot of brain injury cases, and you don't stand up on the jury on a brain injury case on voir dire and say, this is a case of permanent, irreversible brain damage. You start out with, this is a case that involves a head injury. And then as you go along, you let them discover how serious it is. And I never use the term permanent, irreversible brain injury until after the doctor's already used it. So I let them discover. You want them to think, okay, wow, this is serious. Oh, wow, this is very serious. Then as it goes along, this is even more serious. And wow, this is irreversible brain damage. Let them discover it for themselves. Let them discover their own trial story, but you need to feed it to them in such a way that you do. So we know that we all love stories. Information packaged and presented as a story has a strong positive influence on the decision-making process, no doubt about it. If you put together a good story, then everybody is going to resonate to it. Storytelling elicits the strong availability bias, which I'm going to mention in just a moment, by spotlighting, framing, and presenting evidence. The whole idea is to make it memorable. Now, there's three parts to a trial story. It's like any other story. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. The way I found, I've never done any better than what they taught me in the military. The military method of teaching is you tell them what you're going to tell them, then you tell them what you told them. It's just that simple. You tell them what you're going to tell them in voir dire and opening statement. You tell them during the evidence and during cross-examination, during the evidentiary portion. You tell them what you told them in closing argument. That's the presentation of a trial story, and like I said, I haven't figured out how to improve on the military. Now, putting together your trial story, and this is something that may be helpful to you. Putting together your trial story, if you look at each person that has evidence to offer, and consider what their statement is, but tell yourself the story, repeat their story in the first person. I'm talking about when you're preparing your case, when you're putting together your trial story. You put their story, so you've got a witness, you got an eyewitness, and you have a statement from the eyewitness. And the eyewitness was standing at this location and saw this person driving at this distance. The ideal thing to do is to go to that location and repeat the witness's trial story in the first person, standing where they were at the time, saying what they say they saw. It really gives you an identification with, you will see things immediately. Well, wait a minute, that's not possible. So tell it in the first person, prepare it in the first person. We prepare every statement, every witness statement, we prepare it in the first person before we put our trial story together. The next thing is you can look at it from what we call the helicopter view. When you put them all together, your stories together, then you can look at it from the narrator view, and you can narrate the trial story as if you're looking at it, looking down on it from a helicopter, and you're telling things as a narrator. But you want to tell your story, and this goes back to This goes back, you create it in the first person, and then here's the important thing, and trust me on this. Kahneman simply verified it, but the psychologists have known it for years. If you want to communicate directly with the unconscious mind, which is where your decision making takes place, the conscious mind comes into play when the unconscious mind has something that needs to be clarified. If you just penetrate the unconscious mind, it's there. You're there. You're in the brain. You're stored. The conscious mind doesn't come into play unless it needs ratification, needs something else. Here's why you tell the story in the present tense. The unconscious mind, which is where decision making is initially made, does not resonate in the past. It doesn't program in the past. It doesn't process past events. It doesn't process future events. The unconscious mind processes only in the present tense. So if you want your story to resonate, you have to tell your story in the present tense. And then you're communicating directly with the unconscious mind. So you have an ongoing story. Then you do the same thing for your opponent's story. And look at your opponent's story. Look at the prosecution story. Go to the spot where their witnesses were and see what they saw, and try to tell their story in the present tense, and see. You'll get a different view on things. Storytelling in trial, you have to maintain consistency, and that is between your verbal, nonverbal, and vocal communication. Because if you're telling story, if you're using words that talk about this is my friend and client, but then your nonverbal communication during the breaks, during lunch hour, you're completely ignoring him. You have nothing to do with him. He's just your meal ticket. Your nonverbal communication says, I don't have anything to do with this guy. The verbal communication is saying, this is my friend. I have the privilege of representing my dear friend. Whatever. What's wrong with that? If there's inconsistency between the verbal and the nonverbal, who wins? The nonverbal will prevail every time. So what have you done? You made yourself a liar. Then your verbal communication is a lie. So you have to maintain consistency between your nonverbal and verbal communication.